So we're going to talk about your life. We're going to talk about raising kids, being raised as a kid, and just get to know Rick Vroman a little bit is the idea.
Okay.
So I thought we would start with just really your childhood.
Okay.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about where you grew up. What do you remember about your childhood? And I know some people remember more than others, but if you could talk a little bit about, just what stands out about Rick between, let's say, 0 and 12. Let's begin in that space.
Okay, sure. Well, I was born in the Midwest, St. Paul, Minnesota, but my dad worked for 3M, Minnesota Mining Manufacturing, and he got transferred to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, down there in Philadelphia. But I was like 3 when we moved, so I don't remember anything about St. Paul, Minnesota, except what I've seen in pictures. But so I grew up in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I had a very, very good childhood. I think of it as a very good childhood. Didn't want for anything. My dad, because I think this is more about what do I remember about my dad and how did that influence me as a kid, because that's what you're all about with your front row dads, and certainly having people reflect back on what their childhood was like and what they felt their father did well and didn't do well is a learning. It's that crystallized wisdom that you can pass along. So what I do remember as a kid was my dad worked very hard. He left Minnesota Mining Manufacturing. He was an entrepreneur. He formed his own sales company for selling chemicals and things like that, and built his own office building in Drexel Hill. And he was gone a lot. He at one point bought a bowling alley. I mean, not having nothing to do with sales or chemistry. He was a chemistry major, went to Colgate, was a chemistry major in college, and so he was very bright. But he also had that entrepreneurial spirit, which I don't have. I mean, I think you either have it or you don't, and it's okay. You need to find your where you're comfortable, what lane you're comfortable in, and probably why I went to work for a very large organization called the United States Navy, and because I just gravitated to that type of environment. He didn't. He was an entrepreneur. You didn't. The last thing you ever wanted to do was go in the Navy.
Do you feel that you could feel that you had less of an entrepreneurial spirit, like as a kid?
Never thought about it as a kid, but I watched my dad, of course, and he was very demanding. He wasn't cruel or mean, but he was, he had a short fuse, and you couldn't, do things that were, that really upset him. One thing that comes right to mind is an example of, we were all sitting around the dining room table one night having dinner, and everybody had a salad, and my mom had out the salad dressings in the bottle, and somebody had used the salad dressing and didn't put the top back on tight. And my dad was the next guy in line to use the salad dressing, and naturally, as you do, you want to shake it and make sure that that it's well mixed before you put it on your salad. So he took it and shook it really hard, and the cap came off and it went all over the ceiling. Funniest thing my brother and sister and I had ever seen, and we laughed our butts off until we looked at him. He was not pleased. He was not happy, and so that joke ended right there. But that was the type of person he was. Very successful. He had been an athlete in college and an athlete in high school. He played 4 sports. He was much more of a natural athlete than I ever was. But I loved sports. But I realized that I was not the natural athlete that he was. So, in growing up, I always felt like I had to walk on thin ice around my dad, because he was very critical. He would take us fishing. I loved to go fishing with my dad. It was great, but you had to do it right. You got that fish on the line, you kept your rod back, you kept the line taut, and God help you if that fish got off.
Right.
because he was convinced it was something you did wrong.
Yeah.
So that was fun, but it was also very anxiety producing at the same time. I told you about my uncle, his brother, his older brother, who was a total cut up in a card. He was just, Uncle Bob was just a great guy, and I loved to go fishing with my dad and Uncle Bob, because being the older brother, if I did something wrong fishing and my dad started to come down on me, his older brother was all over him.
Yeah.
He couldn't do it, and Uncle Bob just made a joke out of it.
Yeah.
If you screwed up, you lost the fish. So what? You weren't holding your mouth right or something like that. So that was fun to do that. But back to my dad, who was very, very demanding. And it's funny that you say this, because we've talked about the relationship between fathers and sons.
Yeah.
But here I am, 78 years of age, okay? And when you said, I want you to talk about your dad when you were a child, this emotion came over me, to talk about that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm 78 years old. I've had a very successful career. Why would I react emotionally?
What emotion was it?
Anxiety, probably more than anything else. Missing him, loving him, but a little bit of, wow, what could have been? That wasn't.
Between the two of you.
Yeah. So it was, I think that's just an example about that bond between a father and a son is so strong, and it's hard to articulate and explain.
Sure.
Why wouldn't it be just as strong between the son and the mother?
Yeah.
And I have different feelings for my mother, but that's something about that bond.
Something about your dad.
Yeah, with the kids. And talk again, he was a fantastic athlete. I was not, but I wanted to be. I remember I went out for the baseball team in junior high, the basketball team. I got cut. I played football like 8th grade or something, and got my face mushed into I tried wrestling, Then I found soccer, and they didn't cut anybody from the soccer team. And that's where some of this persistence starts to come in, because I realized by training harder than the other folks out there, I wasn't the fastest guy in the field, but by taking more laps, doing more wind sprints, I could last longer, in the game than other people could. And by the end of the game, I was still at my peak, not, just hanging on like a lot of guys were. So I found soccer then became my sport. And, I was on the JV team and eventually fleeted up and got to play a little bit in 9th grade, and then went on and
How old were you
played
when
high
you
school.
started soccer?
It would have been, 9th grade.
Oh, cool.
I don't know how old you are when you were in 9th grade.
14 maybe.
Okay,
Yeah.
And that was because I loved football. My dad was a football player. I loved football, but, I just couldn't compete.
Yeah.
I wasn't very big, and I would just get thumped. And football's a tough sport. And that's why I figured when I hit 9th grade, I wasn't going to continue to play football. That wasn't going anywhere. So I played soccer and became fairly successful. Played in high school. We had a very good high school team. We're undefeated. Won the Pennsylvania State Championship. I was a good player, on an excellent team, and so that was great. But I have one memory about that, which is interesting too, because it goes to my basic personality, and I've always lacked self-confidence. Nobody that's ever known me would probably say that, but I have. That's always been a part of my character. And I remember that in the middle of the season, they used to elect a captain for every game, and I was elected captain for this one game, and we hadn't lost any games up until that point. And I was the captain, and I remember we came to halftime, and it was 0-0, and no captain had ever got the team together and talked to them in high school. I mean, you were the captain, you went out and tossed a coin and did all that, but there was no leadership that I ever saw other than leading by example that was demonstrated by those players. But I thought, this is probably the only game that I'm ever going to be the captain for, This is not going to happen again, and I'll be damned if we're going to lose this. So I got the whole team together, and I basically told them that. I said, look guys, you elected me the captain for this game. We're undefeated up until this point, and I'm telling you, we're not going to be the team that loses this game. Because I don't want to be the captain, and lose this game. We went out and won the game. I'm not sure that had anything to do with it, But I remember the coach took me aside in front of the whole team and said to me, "That's the first example of leadership that I've seen from a captain on this team."
Wow.
But then what happened after that is I kind of retracted a little bit.
Why do you think that?
I don't know. It was like, whoa, maybe I'm not good enough. That was a moment, but can I keep?
Did you feel like the bar was set so high that maybe that was intimidating?
It was. Yeah. It was. Here again, I because my lack of self-confidence in general, which I've had, I kind of thought, I played and I played very well, but I didn't exert any more leadership at that time.
Yeah.
And then I went on and played in college, and here's another story with my dad. I played 4 years in college, varsity soccer, at East Stroudsburg. I made it on the team because I worked out harder than anybody else. I ran more wind sprints, I ran the hill, I was in better shape, and that's the way that, that I would play it. I would just run over people. I didn't have the greatest skills in the world, but, you got the ball. No, you don't. I got the ball. No, I couldn't foul the guy, but and I did a few times, but I would just intimidate them. I remember one game, there was an All-American on the other team. He was one of the forwards. I was a halfback, and the coach said, "That guy is the star of their team. I want you to guard him." And I swear, that poor guy, I was in his back pocket the whole game.
Yeah.
I mean, like right next to him.
Yeah.
I wasn't watching the ball or anything. I was just watching him.
Yeah.
And that was the idea. Don't let him get the ball and score, because he will. If you give him any room, he's going to score.
Yeah.
He never had any room, and he never scored.
Yeah. So good.
But that was that plays into the persistence and the hard work. And I realized that you didn't have to have the most natural talent in the world. If you just worked at it, if you were persistent, you could succeed.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the same attitude that I adopted in the Navy. But back to the soccer story related to my dad, because one thing I remember very much, he was this star athlete in high school, played basketball at Colgate University. I played soccer for 4 years in Upper Darby at the high school, came to one game. No, actually, he didn't come to any high school games. Played 4 years in college. He came to one game. So out of all of high school and all of college, came to one game, even though we had outstanding teams. And it was down near Philadelphia, where I guess he just found he could take time to do that. But it always kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. That
A little or a lot?
Well, that he wouldn't come out. I didn't really understand soccer because he never played it, but he did come to that one game, and I do remember that.
Do you remember ever talking to him about any of this? Were you able to confront him with your life or your relationship? What went well? What didn't go well?
No, never did. Unlike you and I, who have decided that when I pass away, there's going to be nothing left unsaid.
Right.
That we had, anything that bothered you as a kid, anything that bothered me as a father, we were going to get it out there, and we were going to talk through it. And I think that's one lesson, good lesson for your dads is, if there's anything, you need, while the opportunity is still there, you need to put it out there. It's going to make you uncomfortable probably, because if it's just "I love you" and "you're a great dad" and all these types, those are easy things to say. It doesn't mean that you don't mean them, because you do, but they're relatively easy to say. To sit your son down, or for you to sit your father down and say, "Dad, remember back when you did this and this, or you didn't do this and this, that really hurt my feelings. That got me right here." And then you can talk through it, and hopefully the person on the receiving end of that criticism is man enough to say, "I'm really sorry, John, that I hurt you that way. If I could go back and do it again, I would do it differently." But I think that's having the courage to be able to do that. Being humble, and admitting mistakes is not a weakness. It's really a strength. And that's something I've learned over time, but I've seen so many men and guys that it's just, no way I'm admitting that I did that wrong. Even though it's obvious that it was, it wasn't handled well. Whatever it is in them, whether it's pride or whatever, they don't have right term for it is, the humbleness to say, I'm sorry that I did that. And I wish we'd had that conversation, and I wish I had had more intestinal fortitude to force that issue.
Yeah.
But I never felt comfortable. And it was partly because I didn't know how he was going to react.
Yeah.
Maybe he's going to bite my head off. I mean, that had been the pattern. You didn't cross my dad. You didn't challenge him unless you want to get thumped.
Yeah.
And I don't mean physically thumped. He never did that. It was not physical.
Sometimes the emotional thump hurts worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely
It sticks
does.
around longer.
And I know about front row dads, and we've talked before about how each generation can improve on the other generation. And I say to myself, now, why was my dad that way? And I look at his dad. Man, there was no affection there. There was no love. Well, I can't say that. There was probably love, but there wasn't a demonstrated affection. No.
He told you that, or he would talk about that?
No, I just observed it.
Oh, you watched it, yeah.
No. He probably talked about his dad several times, but I could see,
Yeah.
Even as a younger person, you can look at two people, and after you watch them interact for a while, you can pretty much tell what that relationship is. People just have that sense. I think it's a God-given sense that you have to read somebody and to read a relationship and what's going on. It's part of that self-defense, knowing when it's going to go south and when you have to get out of it. So I could tell that I rarely ever remember my grandfather smiling. My grandmother, on the other hand, oh my gosh, big slobbery kisses and making pies, and I never remember her without an apron on. And just a wonderful lady. But my grandfather, and so I think my dad did better than my grandfather in terms of relationship with us. I hope I learned the lessons from my dad for the things that made me uncomfortable, and tried to do a little better with you. But what I see now is you doing much better with your boys, than I did with you. And I think, that's the way that life really should play out. That we should try to make the next generation better. Because, where is this planet going? Where is this world going? Where is civilization going? If we don't try to improve, not just technologically, but we don't try to improve human relationships, as we go through it. We should be becoming a more loving world, and I think the only way that you become more loving is by demonstrating it. And then the younger generation learns that, or they get hurt by not having it, but then they vow that they're not going to do it that way. And I know you, with your sons, that you've taken a lot of the lessons from our relationship and have done better with your sons. And I think that's just great. I love to see that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Do you remember moments, or a moment that stands out where your dad was really proud of you? Where he did show up, he did show affection, he did say words that landed deeply for you? Does anything stand out?
I could sense it, like when I graduated from college, I could sense that he came to the graduation. He didn't come to my high school graduation, but he came to the college graduation. And what had happened there is that our fraternity advisor, I was the president of the fraternity, and our fraternity advisor had written a letter to my dad about me. It was very complimentary, about all the things I'd accomplished, my leadership abilities. I would go to a fraternity party, which are notorious for drinking, right? And I would not drink because, as much as I like beer, I knew that one person there had to have a clear mind and a clear head in case things went south. So as much as I'd love to join in with the guys and have a beer and sing songs, and I did sing the songs, but I knew that as the president, it was my responsibility to make sure nothing went wrong. I can remember one fraternity party where they were dancing, and this guy picked up his date like this, and he's carrying around like this. So I went over, I said, dude, put her down. Put her down. Yeah. You don't want to drop her, because that's not going to go well if you do. And so it was my responsibility to make sure things didn't get out of hand.
Do you think, I see you as a very responsible person. You know, throughout my life, I've demonstrated a lot of responsibility. Did it start in college? Did it feel, do you remember a season of your life when the responsible Rick really kicked in?
I think, it was in college, I think more, and it was interestingly in the fraternity. You know, and I joined the fraternity my freshman year, and you know, and I saw lots of people act different ways, and I tried to pick out people I wanted to emulate in the fraternity, and that led me to a pursuit of the officer positions and that type of thing, which then you had to have more responsibility, you had to be, you know, deny yourself, you know, for the good of the order and that type of thing. So I think it really started with the fraternity. I would give them credit for that. I mean, soccer was wonderful. I was a class officer too, but that didn't have the same feel as when your buddies, your contemporaries on the vote said, "We want you. We want you to lead us in this position." That really gave me, that was the validation, I guess, that I got from my contemporaries. And so we see things in you that we admire, and we want you to have this position in the fraternity.
You know, you said validation, made me think of your dad again, wondering like where might he have validated you at what points. But the real question that I want to, where I'm landing, and this might be like the last question on your dad.
Okay.
But it's like, what is there anything that he modeled for you that you can clearly say, hey, that's something I want to do when I'm a dad? And is there anything on the opposite side of that where you're like, I'm going to definitely go in the opposite direction on that one? And I think I know what the answer on that one would be. But.
Boy, talk about not a tough question, but a big question.
Yeah.
I would say no doubt. You know, when you ask the question, when something comes into your mind immediately, you know, that's how important it is. Hard work.
Yeah.
Hard work, persistence. You know, I talked about that before this started. And hard work. Taking care of your family, providing for your family, because he did a very good job at that. I wish we could have seen more of him, but there was no question there was going to be food on the table. You know, when there was a vacation, he was there, he was in charge. We felt very safe under him because he was very protective. You know, so no question, you know, he was a great model of how to work hard and provide for your family, which definitely carried forward to me. As to what I did. Also created what I think are maybe a few shortcomings, but that was clear to me that was the man's responsibility, was to provide for his family.
Right.
Maybe even above love. You know, and I would look at that differently today, and I know you look at it differently. That you know, I put love at the top. You know.
But in the hierarchy of needs,
yes,
of a, you know, if we look at ourselves as kind of these like walking upright animals who have instincts, instinctual act, we have instinctual programming, then making sure that your cub, your, you know, this little human is protected, right?
Right.
That above all else, like I want to make sure you're fed and alive, perhaps even above the love part of like where I can feel the emotion of all of it, because if you're just trying to keep somebody alive, you're not necessarily dialed into how much you care for that human.
Exactly right.
And how do I express it and how do I connect with them? And
we go back thousands of years.
Yeah.
You know, in history, and I also use caveman examples when certain things that I want. You know, was the caveman worrying too much about how much love he was showing to his son? No. He's out there killing deer and hogs and things like that so he can feed them and they can keep them alive.
Sure.
You know, but then that's why I was talking about evolution over time.
Totally.
You know, where are we going as a species?
Yeah. Yeah, when you can order Uber Eats, it probably makes it easier to sit down and profess your love to your child.
Yeah.
You know, versus having to hunt and then process and cook.
And there's
over
so many
an open fire.
For food and shelter today, even though we do have homeless and things like that, there are multiple opportunities to have shelter and food.
Yeah.
Even for the poorest people. You know, our society has come a long way in doing that. I think that's very good that we do that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think you ought to work, you know, and do your part for society. But we have to take care of those that can't take care of themselves.
One more piece about your childhood
Yeah.
that is going to tie to my childhood, so I'll build a bridge here.
Okay.
With this, is Shell Lake.
Ah.
Can you talk about Shell Lake and the impact that it had on you, and perhaps even like, you could bring in your grandfather to this equation
Sure.
because he's the one that started it. But that's a big part of how I see my childhood, of like there's my life and then there's Shell Lake.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, what a wonderful place that my grandfather bought it. I think it was 1908 or 1907 when he purchased that.
Do you know what he bought it for?
No, I don't. I don't know.
That'd be interesting.
I don't know what he paid, but yeah, back in those days.
$72.
Yeah. But it was 400 feet of lakefront
Yeah.
in northwestern Wisconsin, and you've been there, so you know how beautiful it is. And it's on the east shore. Yeah, the eastern shore,
That's right.
I guess. Yeah,
Because we watched the sunset.
because the sunset went over there, so that means east is back this way. Yeah. So, what a wonderful place to go. Every summer we would go because that was so important to my grandfather. Now that was my grandfather on my mother's side. Okay, not my grandfather on my father's side. I told you about that. He was kind of the opposite in terms of what I observed in him. Very loving. Loved his grandchildren. That's why every summer we would go from Philadelphia to Wisconsin, which is not a short drive or even a short plane ride, because my mom was bound and determined to let him see his grandkids. And then he had 3 other children besides my mom, and they all had kids. And the same thing applied to them. So we had people coming from La Junta, Colorado, California. My Uncle Marvin, as you know, was a naval aviator, and so he lived all over the place, but he even flew his plane in sometimes to Shell Lake because of my grandfather. The one thing my grandfather wanted was his grandchildren, and all his children, who I think were very, very loving, as I remember each one of them, would bring their grandkids there. And that's just where we grew up in the summer times. Great, what great memories, of those things. And here again, a lot of fishing with my dad. Sometimes they were happy, sometimes they weren't happy. I remember one thing that my dad had some of his business friends come to Shell Lake, okay, and they wanted to go fishing. Okay, so he took them out in the boat, and they stuck me in the very point of the boat, okay, the bow of the boat. And as he's trying to maneuver over top of these areas where the fish probably were, and all his buddies, of course, are more toward the back of the boat, and they're casting out, and they're trying to catch these fish. And I'm sitting up in the peak of the boat, facing way out across the lake to town, right? If you can picture that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all in the back, hitting the best spots for the fish. Well, I got a worm on my hook, and I'm reeling in fish right and left.
Just crushing them.
And they're occasionally getting a bite or something, and getting a fish. And, hey, Dad, what do you want me to do with this one?
Yeah. That's so great.
Well, throw it back.
That's so great. That's funny.
Yeah, no, it was, and I wasn't trying to do it.
Yeah.
I was just fishing, and but I was reeling them in, and I'll never forget. He's probably embarrassed that his friends weren't catching any fish, and I was catching fish. But so there were certainly some good times, and he never criticized me like in front of people like that. So that was really fun. We enjoyed doing fishing there, and having campfires, and it was just an idyllic, summer experience, out there in Wisconsin. So special place. Still a special place.
Talk about the FHA and how it came to be.
Yeah, the FHA, well, the girls that were there, when I say girls, I'm talking 12 to 15 or 16, okay, the younger girls. They had a special little cabin that could sleep about 6 girls, and it was called the GLH, okay? And to this day, none of us are sure what that stands for, okay? But the girls would come, and they'd come up and they'd stay in the GLH, and towards the end of the summer, the new girls would be, they'd be let in on the secret as to what the GLH stood for. And they'd have this ceremony outside, with the girls walking around and that type of thing. And then at some point, the boys and really the men, cousins, said, we ought to have, the same thing for the guys. Why don't we have a place where the young boys can go?
Yeah.
And so there was an ice house. It was right up at the road. They used to, in the back in the olden days, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have refrigerators. The ice that they had at the camp in the summertime had been cut off the lake in the winter.
Wow.
And hauled up and put inside a barn-like structure and had sawdust put on it. And that would keep it, fairly frozen. It was built into kind of the side of the hill, and right up just as you come in the driveway. If you were turning right, it would have been
How
right there.
long would that ice last?
It lasted through the summer.
Wow, really?
Isn't that something? Yeah,
That's
it was
incredible.
The insulating properties of the sawdust, I think,
gosh.
were the key, and that's where we got ice,
Yeah.
in the summertime, and so anyway, when that stopped being anything we needed to do because you had a refrigerator, they took the structure because it was still in good shape. They took the structure down and put it where it is right now, where you remember it. And redid it and made it into a boys' house. And that's when they came up and they gave it a name, the FHA, which stood for something that, I guess it was my brother that screwed that one over, because they established the FHA and it stood, when it was first established, it stood for Future Husbands of America.
Right.
That's what it was. And I'll never forget it. My younger brother, John, we were inside in the dining room one time, and of course the fun thing was to try to guess what GLH meant,
Right.
what FHA meant. So we're all sitting around the dining room table, and the girls are trying to guess what FHA means.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're guessing different things, fish hunt and artichokes or something, anything they could think of. And finally, one of them said, "Future Husbands of America." And my brother went, "Oh, yo!" He didn't say you're right. He just, by his reaction, they knew they were right. So he had hosed it, and so we ended up changing, what it meant. We figured, the guys figured, well, we're not going to let them get away with this, so we renamed it.
Yeah.
Which, when we inducted you into the FHA,
Yeah.
it had a different meaning. And in fact, my brother wrote a big long letter. Did I ever give you a copy of the letter?
Yeah, I have it, yeah.
Okay, about how the FHA got the name that it did. And I think that was out of guilt because he had screwed up the first.
And I feel like that letter was like 1977.
Yeah, it could
I
have
might have
been.
been 2 when that letter was
Okay, when he described what it was. Yeah, and I want to make sure you had a copy of it.
Yeah,
So
I do.
So when you were inducted, you knew that. So that's kind of the history behind the FHA.
Yeah.
But what a fun place, where you had a cabin for the girls, cabin for the guys. Everybody ate around the same dining room table every night. You were always together, and they used to have a player piano in there, and they had folks that came over that played it. It had that reel on it, it would play a song that you could just pedal it and it would play the song. And everybody would gather around and sing, because there was no television back at that time, and they had cards, and we played a lot of cribbage.
Cribbage was the game of chalet.
Yeah, and that's, but what a wonderful place to spend a summer. And then when my grandfather passed away, we stopped going back, and we went occasionally, but not frequently like we used to, because he was the reason that we would go that far.
Yeah. But then you took us every couple years to go.
Well, yeah, I wanted you all to experience what I had experienced. That was part of the passing it down the line,
Yeah, it's very cool.
Hey, it was fun for me. I think it'll be fun for you.
Totally.
And I think it was, with the campfires and the hidden treasure. Were you in any of the hidden treasure things?
Well, the treasure hunt that you did for Peyton and Kinsley.
Oh, yeah.
Tiger, yeah.
But you didn't do one as a kid.
No, I didn't do that, but I watched you do it.
Okay.
For them.
I saw how much fun it was for them. Yeah.
Yeah. There's one more. Well, there's lots of things about Shell Lake that stand out for me. The wall with all the names of everybody measured. It's like must be 4 feet wide at this point.
Oh, right.
With 1,000 names on it. I don't know, but you're on there
when
and
I'm a little kid.
Yeah. I'm on there as a little kid. Tiger's on there as a little kid. Which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the napkin holder that I still have in my office. that you carved for me
Yep.
when I was 8, because I know it was 1983 that it's on there. Where did the napkin holder thing start? Because I feel
My
like
grandfather.
yeah, like, do you remember, was that something that, yeah, do you know the story
I
of how that
don't know.
began?
I don't know how that became a thing. All I remember is that he would carve a napkin ring for anybody that came to Shell Lake to visit.
Yeah.
Not just for a day or two. You'd have to come for a little while, but certainly all of his grandkids and everything. In fact, I still have my dad's napkin ring,
Right.
that my grandfather made for him. Very intricate and that type of thing with like Hawaiian flowers on it. And I have it up on my
I can picture it.
in my study.
Yeah.
Up on one of the shelves in my study. So that was something that he would do as a gift for everybody that came there. We wanted to carry that tradition on, and my dad did it. For a while he wasn't as artsy fartsy. He wanted to get it done, but he still did it. And you had to take a block of wood and carve it out to make a napkin ring out of it.
Yeah.
So it was a laborious process.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let's talk a little bit. I said I wanted to use Shell Lake as a bridge. But let's start talking a little bit about now your life as a dad, with Kirsten, my sister, who's 3 years older for anybody listening to this later. But I want to talk a little bit about what was it like for you to be a dad. And maybe what you can do is just look at it from the angle of like, hey, as a new dad, because I think that and I'm trying to chunk this out so that we can kind of get to these different parts. One part is you're a Navy officer, you're traveling around, you're building a life, you're earlier in your career, you've got younger kids, and there's that era of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's probably a later era, which is like you've got teenage kids. That is a different, maybe, stage of life.
Yeah,
totally different game.
Yeah.
Different set of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the earlier part of being a dad and tell me a little bit about what you remember about that season of life. Just anything that stands out for you as far as what was going great or maybe what wasn't going great. Was life easy as a new dad? Were you getting your kick to the nuts? What was going on?
Well, it's certainly easier as a new dad
Yeah.
than it was as an older dad. As anybody would know, dealing with teenagers and, where they...
I was a particularly special breed.
You were a special person. Where they come home one day and you go, what did you do with my son?
Yeah.
What did you do with my daughter?
Sure.
Who's in that body?
Yeah.
So it was, but here again, I revert back to my job was to provide for the family. What does that mean? Food, shelter, and it was a little more than that because I wanted everybody to be happy too.
Yeah.
And of course, your mom was a great mom, took wonderful care of you. I mean, you think about the places that she had to go, when we were in the Navy, flying different places alone with a young kid. And I'd say half the time I wasn't with you guys when you were moving.
Mm-hmm.
I would go ahead and try to find, certain places that mom might want to live and that type of thing. But thank goodness for her, that she was able to provide that. So, yeah, as a dad, it was just kind of shocking because I was there when Kirsten was born. I was there when you were born, but it was almost like you're looking at it going, "What the heck is going on?"
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a miracle, that this tiny thing is created, and I can remember going over with Kirsten in Sasebo when you were born, and going into the hospital, and you were born much quicker than she was.
Mm-hmm.
Kirsten was the first one, and it took Mom a lot longer to get her delivered at Fort Ord in California. So that gives you a little bit of the Navy life. She's born in Fort Ord, you're born in Sasebo, Japan.
Right.
And then we moved, 15 times, I think, in those years. So, yeah, it was kind of like I didn't know what to do but I also felt like I didn't have to know, and I would play with you guys and that type of thing. But you're really attached to your mom pretty much, up through, as you hit the junior high, it starts to get, a little more impactive in terms of how the father ought to be playing a role. But here again, I was still I was in the mold of my dad pretty much. It was, your job is to provide for the family.
Sure.
And make sure they're safe and they have medical care and, they get enough to eat and nobody hurts them. That's my job as a dad, to do all that. And the other thing that I did do that I'm proud that I did is every time we would move, when you guys were old enough to be able to talk about it, you were always in on the decision of where we were going to go. Now I don't want to create the impression that I could decide where we were going. That was what a detailer did. But I got a vote.
Yeah.
The detailer would say, well, I got these 3 jobs, which one, would you like, and where are they, and which one's best for your career? It was tough juggling those.
Sure.
What's best for your career? What does your family need? As you move. But we always had you in on the conversation. Now I realized later on that you guys, if you didn't want to go to wherever you wanted to go, you didn't say anything. Now the one I remember is going back to Japan. Kirsten was fine with that. Mom was fine with that. Japan was wonderful when it went back. And that was Yokosuka. So you were already 3 years old or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So you get a vote, but anyway, Kirsten did. And other decisions that we made, we would all sit down around the table and say, all right, here's the opportunities for Dad. Where would you like to go? Mm-hmm. So we tried to balance that into what was good for my career.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and then there's the teenage years.
Whoa. Yeah.
This is probably the hardest time.
They are. Yeah.
What was that like for you, raising, teens?
Well, Mom took the brunt.
Yeah.
Of it, really. She did. She handled that. It was perplexing, because I kind of didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And a regret would be that I don't know if I showed enough affection and love at that point. I'd like to think that I did, but I could honestly say I was still in the provide for your family mode.
Sure.
At that point in time. Certainly cared about you, was sensitive, came to your soccer games when you were playing to Mechanicsburg, because that had not been my experience. So there's one that was, passed down the line, do better than your dad did when it came to, when you were on the gym team, all your gym meets, always went to your gym meets, and very proud of, what you did in all those different venues. Wonder if I showed enough of my pride to you that made you feel comfortable as you were doing those things. I really don't know if I did or not. Here again, our relationship was not as close as I think it is with your sons, where you kind of know what they're thinking and you're telling them what you're thinking, and you have a much closer bond. So, yeah, that's, teenage years were tough. The Jeep, your Jeep. And you were starting to be your own man. That's what I think happens in teenage years. And I don't think, one of the things I was always very proud of you is that you didn't feel like you had to follow in my footsteps. You didn't need to go to college, just because I went to college, that type of thing. You certainly didn't feel like you needed to go in the Navy.
And you could be proud of you too. You didn't follow in your father's footsteps.
True. Yeah. Well, I just wasn't cut that way.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's
I
important.
felt the same way.
Important to realize how you're cut.
That's
you're,
right.
You're cut as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I was cut as a company man.
Yeah.
A Navy man. I was very proud of the Navy. And,
Sure.
And the fact that I could serve in the Navy and make a difference.
Yeah.
And that was the way my group of officers, the Supply Corps, certainly made their officers feel good.
Right.
From a junior officer on up. It wasn't true in all branches of the Navy in terms of specialties, but in the Supply Corps, very much a family.
Yeah.
I went in during Vietnam, and I went in because if I hadn't joined the Navy, I was going to get drafted.
Yeah.
Back at that time, you could get a 4-year college deferment from going in the draft. In Vietnam, that was 1967. Vietnam was really heating up, and it was, when you walk down the steps from your graduation in college, if you didn't have either a occupation that was exempt, or you weren't going in the Air Force or the Navy, you're going in the Army. They're going to hand you a gun, put a green uniform on you, and you're going to Vietnam. We know what that, the number of casualties in Vietnam. And so in my senior year, I kind of decided, not sure I want to go over to Vietnam and be a ground pounder. Not that there was anything wrong with that. It was something I thought, if I have a choice, that's probably not what I want to do. And Uncle Marvin was in the Navy. Mac was in the Navy. A number of Navy people in our family. So I thought, I'm going to go to OCS. And so I applied. I applied for OCS, and I got in. And when I got in, they said, congratulations, you're going to be a supply corps officer. And I remember thinking, what the hell is that?
They tell you.
Because of the fact that I was blind as a bat.
But you didn't necessarily choose. It wasn't like you had a sheet of
you had a sheet, and you said, this is what I want to do. And I thought, that'd be kind of fun to drive a destroyer, out at sea, man. That'd be great, going through the waves. So that's what I put down. And I got the acceptance back, and they said, congratulations, you're going to Officer Candidate School, you're going to be a supply corps officer. And I said, what the hell is a supply? I didn't know what it was.
I didn't even know that part of the story.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so I called Mac, who was my cousin, who was he was an engineering duty officer.
Yeah.
So he had gone to the academy and became an engineering officer, so that's what he did. And he said, the supply corps. He said, that's a very elite group of guys who run the business of the Navy.
Oh, that's
all
cool.
The business stuff of the Navy. I said, oh, really?
Yeah.
So, it's not. So then I decided, he said, you can be an engineering duty officer if you want, and, be down in engine rooms on ships. I thought, I don't know. I think the supply corps sounds pretty good. And so that's what I did. And it turned out to be the greatest decision, because when I went in during Vietnam, it was, I'm going to do my obligation, which was 3 years of active duty. I'm going to get out and do something else. But I found out that the supply corps treated you so well, as a junior officer. They really looked out for you and took care of you, that I stayed in for 27 years. So what was a 3-year decision became 27. And I remember the turning point is we were down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, going through refresher training, which is really rigorous stuff. And I got released from active duty orders because they had a few too many supply corps lieutenants in the Navy, and so they were just letting some of them out were the reservists. Okay, you don't have to finish your obligation, we'll just let you out. And I got released from active duty orders in Cuba, and I thought, wait a minute, I was going to get out, but I don't have a job. I'm going to go home. I'm married, and I'm in Cuba. This is not the place I wanted to be released from active duty. So I went over and talked to one of the senior officers on one of the bigger ships. And I told him what my situation was. Now, back at that time, you couldn't communicate by telephone with the United States from Cuba. It was like a one-way ham radio type of thing. And he said, so you don't want to get out? I said, well, not from here. He said, what do you want to do? I said, well, Athens, Georgia, where I went to supply corps school, was a great place. I think I'd like to go teach there. I always kind of thought I'd like to teach. He says, give me a couple days. A couple days later, I get orders to Athens, Georgia to teach.
Wow.
So he had got on the phone with the people in the Bureau of Naval Personnel, and got me orders, no release from active duty, go to Athens to teach.
Wow.
And I thought, these people take care of their own. And that taught me a lesson. And as I got to be an officer, a senior officer, I had people working for me, I treated them the same way.
Yeah.
You're a valuable asset. You may only be a lieutenant junior grade, but you're a valuable asset. I'm going to groom you, make you the best that you can be. And that just kind of snowballed through. And that's why I stayed for 27 years.
Yeah, big career. Going back to raising teens.
Yeah.
And I know that we could do a 3-hour show on this, of all of what, it's hard to unpack years of all of what happened, but the big stuff of, thinking about what would be interesting for other men to hear, what would be interesting for grandkids to hear one day, is a little bit about, look, I'll set it up. Okay. I was a difficult human to parent, in that season. And I'm not, let's just say my teenage years, I'm not talking about when I was, doing gymnastics and that, but I'm talking 15, let's say. 15 to 17. Because I think that there's something here in this space for everybody. And that is that, if you look back on those years, what would you say was like, what would you say you're proud of? What would you say, hey, if I could do it again, I would do something differently from your perspective? And I could say the same thing being the kid, but I wanted this to be about you. And I just want to acknowledge that that was a very difficult time.
Oh, it was. But it begs the question, and I'll turn it around.
Yeah.
Because it begs the question, in my mind, which is, had you been treated any differently when you were younger, would you have had the same response that you had when you were a teenager?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is
If we had been closer.
Yeah. The answer is, the answer is probably always, if you change something in the past, you change the future. Like, you just tip a different set of dominoes over, right? So I think that's always part of the answer. But I also believe that everything was perfect and happened the way it needed to happen. It couldn't have happened any other way.
Okay.
So I believe that. So I think it's interesting to think about, like, well, what would have happened if, you asked to go to Athens and they didn't send you to Athens? Like, would your life have been any different? The answer is, like, of course it would have been, because you just chose a different path. But, it did happen the way it happened. And I think that my responsibility also is that at some point, it's not about you, the dad, it's about me and the choices I make. And I heard something recently, I can't quote the source or where it came from or even the accuracy of it, but it's fascinating to think about, and that is how much you actually play a role in the outcome of a child is far less than you think. And now, it's not to discount the dad's role in a child's life.
Right.
Significant role, undoubtedly, right? And the data also shows that. Dads that are present, dads that are engaged, kids grow up, the stats are staggeringly better when a father is engaged in his family.
Right, but not guaranteed.
But the other thing that is also and I'll just call it a fact, because I heard it as a fact, I just can't quote where it came from, is the friends that kid meets along the way, the teachers, the coaches, the mentors, the things that kid might experience that have nothing to do with mom and dad.
That's right.
Like, if you're in a sport and your coach is a total asshole to you, or you're somehow abused by somebody outside of the home, these are things that affect your life significantly.
Right.
But it's not what mom and dad did or didn't do, per se. It's about the circumstances of the world that surrounds them.
Right.
And depending on what area of, you might grow up in a war-torn country, and you might have all these things happening in and around you that affect your life. Yeah. So the point is that some of how I turned out to be was nature, some of it was nurture, and a lot of it didn't have to do with you and mom.
Yeah, but the question that comes to my mind is, and we haven't talked about this one before, but is, as you look back on your teenage years, where you were kind of rebellious and you were causing mom and I a lot of heartburn and things like that, did you think that if you had been brought up differently, that you wouldn't have been that way?
No, I didn't have the thought. Not then. I don't think I had the thought then. And I don't know if I give much thought to it now.
Okay.
Because I think actually my height had more to do with my, so small, and that affected how I saw myself.
Me too.
It affected how I saw myself.
Yeah.
So that was I think that, and when I talk about like why I did the things I did, how I became who I am today, a lot of it has to do with just being super short.
Yeah. Well, the interesting parallel there, because a lot of my shyness and things came because I was short.
Yeah.
Too. And I think what's interesting is that we both had that experience, and we both overcame it with persistence.
Yeah.
We just worked hard at what we wanted to be and what we wanted to do to be successful.
Yeah.
So I'm almost thinking, like, was that a gift? That
it always is in hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah, that we weren't the tallest kid in the class. We weren't the best athlete. We weren't the most popular in the class. Type of thing. that maybe that was a gift in a way to create who we decided to become.
No doubt. Yeah. I think I hear this often when it comes to people's circumstances in life. Like somebody will come down with a life-threatening illness and they'll say, I don't wish that, here's an example. Ram Dass. I watched a movie with him recently, a documentary about the end of his life. And he had a stroke. And he said that the stroke actually was a great gift because it pushed him inwards even more. And he was such a fan of meditation and going inward and, with the exploration of the heart and the mind from within, that he considered the stroke to be a great gift to him to go even further inward. He said, I don't necessarily wish a stroke on somebody, but I wish them the grace that comes with the stroke. And I've heard that from people who battle cancer. I don't wish cancer on somebody, but I wish somebody the gratitude that comes from knowing that every minute of every life is precious. And so I think that is a common thread. I don't wish the catastrophe or the trauma or the pain, but I do wish for you to have the lessons that come from often those types of deep experiences. Yeah. So when you look back on that time, what would you say that you're proud of for yourself as a dad, and what would you say that you would have done differently? And I think I could gather what you'd have done differently because of what you've shared.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have done anything differently. I tried to be reasonable, with you. When you really would step over the line, like you did that one time in Gaithersburg with Mom, I would call you up short.
Yeah.
But not very often. I suppressed, that anger, or that frustration or whatever, and didn't come down on you really hard. I don't think I did. You know whether I did or not. I gave you a lot of rope to hang yourself.
Yeah.
And you did string yourself up several times.
Yeah.
But never gave up on you.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to get to this, by the way.
Okay.
I know that we got to be conscious of the time.
Right.
What time are we? 10 more minutes?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay.
All right.
So there's I want to cover a couple of things here before we wrap. One is family cornerstones. So I think this is really applicable to other people because you wrote this document in January 1st, 1980, it says, and the document reads, the Vromans believe that a happy life has its foundation in a happy family, and a happy family is the result of the following basic principles: consideration of each other's needs and feelings, mutual trust and honesty, self-respect and respect for each other, doing things together and sharing a good time, treating each other as we would like to be treated. Can you tell me about the process of putting this together? Because I've sat down to write what I think are our values, and I get hung up a lot. I try to make it perfect. It's usually too long, but I'm like, this is beautifully simple. It's handwritten, and it still sits in your room.
Yeah, hangs
in a
on the
frame,
wall.
right?
Yeah. Oh, in a frame.
Yeah, to this day.
That's
and
right.
I think it's awesome. So do you remember putting it together?
Yes.
Do you remember why you put it together or your process for putting it together?
I thought it was important to try to get down on paper, and I followed the same type of thing in the Navy. Try to get down on paper what the essence of something is, and make it understandable. I mean, you could read books on family values, right?
Yeah.
And chapter after chapter after chapter, and I have just found, and I use this in my Navy career too, is you've got to make it concise, you got to make it meaningful, impactful, so that people get the essence of what you're trying to do. So, and I don't remember the exact process I went through to get that. I just, at that time, and that was a number of years ago, I just thought, I think it would help to articulate for the family what we value.
Sure.
And so that as things happen from day to day, that's what you fall back on, and that's why I had you all sign it. You signed it as what, a
8-year-old.
8-year-old. Is because I wanted you guys
No, a 5-year-old.
Yeah, I know.
5-year-old, sorry.
And, and I knew what you knew and couldn't know back at that time, but I wanted the signature was so that we're all saying, yeah, we believe in these things. And because when life gets hard and you fall off the rails or whatever it is, could you go back to that and, you know, like being respectful of each other?
Yeah.
You know, and you go back and say, hey, John, as you're disrespecting me, remember you signed this and said you're going to be respectful. You meant it, didn't you? And this, yeah, Dad, I did. Well, think about that, because you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm going to violate some things on here, but we have to circle back to this, because this is what makes the family unit function well, and it's good for everybody.
Yeah. So I think you're better than me in this area, Dad. I just wanted you to know that I think
Summarizing things, or
well, meaning like, you know, sometimes you'll give me a lot of credit for like you're like, I think you're, you know, you've done a better job, or you're a bet. I don't know if you use the word better, but it kind of feels like when you're praised is like, you did that, I didn't do that with you.
right.
This you did and I haven't done in this way. I've tried to write it. I've complicated it. You know, it's difficult. But I love that you put it on paper. I love that you made it simple. I love that you got it done. I love that you executed on it.
You could use it.
There's actually.
I mean, you could give it to your family and say, "This
This
is
is
what my dad wrote."
By the way,
how do you guys feel about this?
It's been ordered. It's being delivered to my house, by the way, this week. So
Okay.
we're gonna hang it in the foyer. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
You should mention that.
Yeah, you don't have to create everything yourself. Or
Yeah.
You can look at it and it's like that persistence
Yeah,
quote
for
that
sure.
you asked me about.
Yeah.
That I didn't write that, but I read it and I thought this really resonates with
Yeah.
me as to how you can get through life and be successful.
Yeah.
You got to be persistent.
Yeah.
Because life's going to kick you. It's going to, you know, you're going to be treated unfairly.
Sure.
You know, you're not going to get that promotion that you know you deserve.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? Give up?
Right.
No, you don't give up. You persist.
Yeah.
You know, and that here again, I wasn't the best wrestler. I wasn't the best soccer player. You know, wasn't the best naval officer, but I was persistent, and I kept trying and I kept trying, and that gets you a long way.
Yeah.
When you do that. But that's interesting to hear you say that, because you don't have to reinvent it yourself.
Right.
You can just say, hey, you know, these aren't bad ideas.
Yeah. I would just have my kids sign the document.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's wrap with what
Okay.
do you want this part of your life? So, Rick Vroman,
Yeah.
at this age going forward, what do you want your relationship with your family to look like? With myself, with Kirsten, with your grandkids? What's your vision for your life?
Well, I think it has to all center around love. You know, love and respect. You know, for your family, wherever they go, whatever they do. I would always want my family to know that I'm there for them. You know, and no matter what they do, I'm there. You know, and I will support them. I will love them. I will try to point them in the right direction. When they fall down, I will pick them up. You know, you and I talked about the book that I'm reading, Strength to Strength, about, you know, crystallized intelligence. You know, I should be able to pass along wisdom to you all. It's funny how when you get older, you don't get more confident. You know, that hasn't been my experience. You know, despite all the things, and I've got plaques on the wall and Teacher of the Year, you know, at EVMS and that type of thing. But, you know, that hasn't made me more confident. You know, you become more humble the older that you get, and you realize what young folks can't necessarily see, and I think it's our responsibility as geezers to try to pass that on to them. That, hey, I was where you were at that time. Here's how I dealt with it. Now they can they can decide to blow that off, and that's fine. But I think it's your responsibility as an adult, you know, older person, to say this was my experience. This is what I learned.
Yeah.
If you can benefit from that, great. You know, and that's what I see myself doing, because I know I'm not getting any stronger. I'm not getting any more coordinated, that type of thing. And I know I'm a little slower than I probably was, but I think it's the slowness, I think, comes from being more thoughtful. You know, you can be real quick with decisions and statements and things like that, you know, when you're younger, period. And I'm sure I was that way, you know, you bam, 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 bam. But when you get older, it's like, Maybe I ought to think about that a little bit before I say anything. And I think a lot of older people think, well, they're just slowing down mentally. Maybe a little bit, but I don't think in most cases that's what's going on. Is you become more thoughtful, more considerate, think before you act type of thing. That's and that's what I'm trying to be comfortable with, and I am comfortable with it. And being that way.
That's cool. So we're out of time. But for this conversation,
did I say enough?
But we should have this conversation again, because as I'm talking, I'm like, oh, there's still hours.
Yes.
So we got to do a part 2, and I would really want to do that. What I want to capture for a couple minutes at least is some acknowledgement to you for. I want to just thank you for being a great dad, and I want to thank you for being there.
I'm humbled.
I want to thank you for providing. Because I think that it takes a lot of effort to go out in the world and do what you did, to provide the life that you provided. There's so many things that were great. The homes that we lived in, the places that we got the chance to see. I loved that we traveled. I loved that we moved. I loved that I got a chance to see the world. I loved that I got a chance to reinvent myself. There were so many things about my childhood also that were really awesome. Like when you taught me karate, that was awesome. I remember the trips to Shell Lake were awesome.
Yeah.
They were really profound. Being inducted into the FHA was great. You provided opportunities for me to play sports, and you funded those things, and you gave me a pathway, helped me get my start, with the Jeep, and then into my first home. And there's so many ways that you showed up that was so great for helping me to move along as an adult.
Thank you.
It's also been awesome to watch you in this season of life where, you got your black belt when you were how old?
Oh, I don't know, 60 something.
So
upper 60s.
So in your upper 60s, you get your black belt. Mom's jumping out of airplanes, I think, in her 60s, right?
Yeah.
So I got a mom and dad who, like, one's jumping out of an airplane, one's getting his black belt. That sounds pretty.
Well, getting a black belt makes sense. Jumping out of an airplane makes no sense.
That's pretty epic. It's pretty epic. And you two, we're actually here recording because you two are, we're here celebrating Kirsten's daughters.
Right.
Your granddaughter's graduation. So you show up, right? You agree to do this interview, and
my biggest fear with this was that you were going to ask me questions, and I was going to sit here and I was going to go blank.
You're like, what do I do with my hands?
Yeah. And then you were going, oh geez, now I gotta fill in for this geezer.
No.
Doesn't
I
know
knew
how to
that
say
wasn't going to
anything.
happen. Okay. But yeah, I really want to honor you for just how you've lived your life. And the space that you've given for me to live
wonderful.
mine, and it's been a great journey, and I think that we've still got great years ahead. So last year we went on vacation together, our whole family, and I hope it's not the end of our travel. I hope it's not the end of our exploration. And thank you, and thanks to Mom for taking care of yourselves, for being healthy, because we got you for a lot of years, and I hope we get you for a lot more. So thank you for this.
I'm humbled.
Yeah. Love you, Dad.
Love you too.